Hi guys. Last night we talked about most of the modeling tools that we use for box modeling in Maya. Now, one of the ones that we didn't cover was how to extrude on a path. And this is something that will be extremely useful when you start working on your own projects. So what we want to do is we're going to go to poly modeling right now. I'm going to create a cylinder. And I'm going to make that cylinder's properties about, let's say, radius of 4, a height of about 10. Let's keep that at 20 subdivisions for now for the different sides of the cylinder. Now I want to change the subdivisions in height to be 8 and the subdivision caps too, so that eventually I can go ahead and use that information to create an extrusion. So the goal for this is to be creating a coffee mug. So I'm going to try to create basically a cup. And that coffee mug is going to be, the handle of it is going to be extruded by using extrude on a path. So how do we do this? Well, let's switch our viewport from the perspective to the front viewport, and I am going to use curves for doing this. So curves are found under either create curves, or you can find them under the curves shelf up here, curves and surfaces. Now curves are basically the same, they work basically the same way that they work in a program like Illustrator, vector-based. And these over here are what we call NURBS, and we will be talking about those next week. So how do we create these? The closest one of the tools that works like Illustrator is the EP curve. So we're going to choose that to create a curve for this particular, the outline for what we're going to be using, the path for the extrusion. And then if I were to click and click and click and click, you notice that I'm creating a curve. Let me go ahead and hit return, and that becomes an actual object. Now, as a curve, this does not render, so it will not appear on your rendering. When you render this, that's invisible. But you have the ability to use it for other purposes, such as a guide, or to define a space, or to create a surface. Now, let me go ahead and with that selected, choose my move tool so that you can see that basically whenever you draw, the center pivot point for that object that you create for the curve is always at the center of the universe. But you can always center it to the object if you want to by going modify and center pivot, which will look at the average position of all the elements within the object and average where the center would be. Now that object, just like polygons, also has components. So if I right click it, I have access to its edit points, to what we call control vertices, and other things. So we're going to talk about that in more detail, like I said, next week. For now, what I want to do is I want to combine two things. Let me select this and delete it. And I want to go ahead and two things. I want to go ahead and activate snap to grid because I want to make use of the grid information. So I'm going to click up here to snap to grid. Then I'm going to use the EP curve to create the shape of a handle on this side of the cup. Now you'll see that when I do that, if I click, my points that I'm creating will snap to the grid. And let me go ahead and do that here. Boom, boom. So let's presume that that is the handle for my cup. Now, if I'm not happy with what I see, I want to fine tune it, I can always go back in and change it. So let me go ahead and hit return so that this takes, and right click on it, edit point, and I can go ahead and edit the points. You'll notice that it changes the shape of the curve if I wanted to change it. If I don't want it to snap anymore at this point, turn off the grid snap and you can have a free-flowing curve. You can go ahead and change that way. You can also use the other components to modify this in more detail. And like I said, we're going to be seeing that in class next week. So for now, let's say that this is what I want. So with that curve, you'll notice that, let me go back to object. It's been created on the front viewport. When I go to my perspective viewport, you'll notice that this is basically attached to the side of my cup. Well, it's not attached, it's built right next to it. So let me go ahead and select the cylinder and activate the wireframe on shaded option. So let's go ahead and have that so we can actually see where this curve was created. And you notice that it was created right at the seam of one of my edges. So I want that curve to be at the center of one of my faces, probably this one. So how do I do that? How do I move? Well, I'm not going to move the curve because the curve it'll take me longer to move the curve and try to fit it exactly on that center of of the faces, then to turn the entire cylinder around a little bit so that the face is right, the center of this face is at the position, at that position of that curve where it starts. And so how do I do that? I'm going to go ahead and select that cylinder and I am going to rotate it. I'll calculate that if this is subdivided into 20 sections, that means that this would be, if I need to rotate it by a certain amount of degrees, it would be 360 divided by 20 divided by 2. So if I do that, it would be 360 divided by 20, it would be 18, divided by 2, it would be 9. So if I rotate 9 degrees on the y-axis, I rotated this enough that the face is smack in the center, that the point of that curve, the end point of that curve, or the beginning point, will be at the center of that face. And so with that in mind, I can go ahead, and this is actually for my personal use so that you don't have to rotate and have that in the center. This is just me being, picky about what I'm doing. But the curve extrusion on a path will work in any circumstance as long as you have a path and you have something to extrude. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and right click on the object, on the cylinder, and I'm going to turn on faces. I'm going to delete this face down here where the path ends. I want to remove that. And then I'm going to use this guy right here to extrude along that path. The way this works is the exact same way that extrusion works when we were working in class. So let me select this face and I'm going to extrude that. With that done, let me go ahead and shift select my path. So I have that face and the path selected. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, Extrude, Options. And you'll notice, we didn't talk about this in detail in class, but you'll notice that, let me go ahead and reset this tool. You'll notice that the top portion is the amount of divisions, the angle, the offset, and the thickness that we see on the tool when we open up the extrude, that little pop-up window that opens up. That is the information that's inside that window. What doesn't show in that little window, in the little pop-up menu that floats every time you extrude, is this down here, which is what curve settings are you using. And if you have selected as the option, it's going to be using that path in order to extrude along that path. So when I go ahead and say extrude, let me actually increase the amount of divisions. I'm going to increase it to about 12. So let's go ahead and do that. And so that we see more curvature, but you can always go back and change that in just a second. It's not set in stone. So let me go ahead and say extrude, and you'll notice that now this face was extruded along that path, as you can see. The more divisions you have, the smoother your end result is going to be. But keep in mind the amount of polygons versus the amount of rendering time that this is going to take. So that's something to take into account. So if I increase it to, let's say, 24, then I should be okay for now. And you can, everything else still applies. So you can change the thickness of things, the Z translate. You can change the offset to make it smaller or bigger, depending on what you're going for. All of the same things that apply to extrude apply to this. Now, with that in mind, let's go ahead and rotate this guy. I have by default, because I extruded it, the face that I had selected up here is now at the bottom of this thing. So let me press F to zoom into it, rotate it, and I want to delete that face. So with that face selected, let me go ahead and delete. So that face is deleted. And let me actually delete this face here, this face here, this face here, and this face here. What I want to do at this point is I want to target weld this edge loop, right here to this edge loop where the hole was created earlier. So I can do that either by vertex target weld or edge target weld. It's completely up to you. As we saw in class, either one or two works the same way. So let me go ahead and do target weld, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my edges and weld them. Whoops, weld them to the appropriate corresponding edge on the other side. So we should be good to go now. This is basically one solid thing. And now the handle is part of the cup. Now let me go ahead and press 3 on this. Let me go back to object mode, press 3 so we can see the smooth preview, and you'll notice that you have a fairly decent handle. Now there's some weird geometry going on over here, which can be changed obviously. So let's go back to 1. And that is because one of the edges is overlapping the other. So we might need to go in here and change that edge or these pivot points, not pivot points, vertex points, sorry, a bit. Let's see, that will probably alleviate the situation. Yeah, so let's say vertex, no, edge mode, select this, pull this up, and so that we can smooth that out a little bit better so that we don't have that funky crease on this side. So that fixes that. I probably would have to fix this one as well. Anyway, I don't want to get as detailed on that. The second thing was that I added this extra loop on my cap so that I can eventually go ahead and probably paint select this. So let's go to face mode, paint select this area here. And remember, you paint select by pressing the tab key and keeping it pressed. Then I'm gonna go ahead and scale this up like so to give this a little reinforcement on this side. Then I'm gonna go ahead and extrude this guy, and I'm gonna center the gizmo to the world. Then I'm gonna click on one of the, probably this guy here, one of the little boxes, so that I access my scaling tool. And I don't need that many subdivisions. I only need about 2 subdivisions, probably at most. And so that would do. And let's go ahead and give that, boom. Now let's go ahead and switch my tool to the scale tool and scale the second set of faces. So now I have the lip of my cup with the little reinforcement edges. Now I can go ahead and extrude once again, but this time I'm going to be using the shift key and I'm going to click and drag on the selected faces so that I've now pushed that down. So you can see now that I have reinforced. Take a look at this. I have a reinforcement up here, this edge loop right here, this edge loop, then this edge loop. Those are the first one up here is the one that was originally created. The second one I created by extrusion, and this one I also created by extrusion. Now I just extruded this a little bit inward, downward that is, into the cup to create another reinforcement on the opposite end, on the inner portion of the cup. And then I'm going to press shift again, and I'm going to extrude completely. Well, not that. I need to select the faces again. Let me go ahead and paint select them. Then I'm gonna go ahead and extrude this downward so that I have basically the space inside the cup. So let's presume that this is good. And I'm gonna go ahead and now with that reinforcement, when I press the 3 key, my cup will retain the shape up at the top. Let me turn off the wireframe on, shade it, so you can see that you have a fairly clean upper lip and you have the handle on the cup by extrusion on a path.